computer. All right, looks like we've made it to the internet there, Al. Another veteran's voice.
Yes, it's successful for now.
So why don't you go ahead and kick us off and give a little intro to everybody on the show and tell them what day and year it is and stuff.
If I know, it's August and it's 2021, and I think it's the 23rd or something like that, but it's Sunday morning, and you got Al Byrne speaking with Mike Krawitz. We're the co-founders of Veterans from Medical Cannabis Access, and we're going to talk about that quite a bit today. What that organization, why was it founded, what is it doing, what's it doing now, and what's the future maybe. We'll also talk to Veterans Action Council, a separate group made up of all kinds of veterans from all over the different age groups and conflicts, men and women, everybody. And that group is a leadership type group. It's a closed group. It's only open by invitation. There are several hundred of us, though. And basically, it's a way to discuss issues and put them into some sort of priority and use these issues that we decide are priorities to try to influence basically our federal government. That's what we're after these days. So what we have done with the VMCA is Mike and I decided we had worked together for years, and we got together in 2007, and we drew up the plans for the VMCA, which was and is a all volunteer organization. No one takes any money. We suck up our own expenses, which aren't much. And we band together on issues. We'll talk about those issues today, a lot of them. And the thing that's good about the VMCA and all these volunteers is, first of all these guys and gals have become very well educated on the subject matter, medical cannabis. They really know what they're talking about, and they stay up with it. The next thing that's good about them is they're there. They are out there representing veterans everywhere, but they're in their city, they're in their state. They're working with the law enforcement, they're working with politicians, they're working with doctors and nurses to get the education spread as wide as possible. And they're having great success, especially with the addition of certain problems to the list of lists that these states create. And that's another problem we'll discuss. I don't, Mike probably agree with me, but these lists are just absurd. I don't even understand the logic of it. But anyway, the MCA has been around since 2007. I'll let Mike tell the story about how we got the VHA to allow veterans to use cannabis within their facilities all over this country, with no loss of benefits. I say again, no loss of benefits using cannabis while you're a veteran. There is no loss of anything, no matter what you hear. But anyway, the story was that we influenced the VA to allow cannabis use by veterans in VA facilities. It's complicated, but it's there. But now we're going to talk again today. One of my pet peeves is what I've tried to get people to understand by saying that veteran care in the United States, when it relates to the use of the cannabis plant, it depends on geography, your zip code. Basically, your ability to use cannabis as a medicine within the VA facility simply depends on where you live, which is the newest kind of medical care I've ever heard of. I'm not sure you could call that medical care. Doctors, nurses, professional healthcare people treat you because you're ill, injured, et cetera, not because you live across the street. But in regards to the federal policy of the United States, that's exactly what happens. And I'll just explain this one. The law says that cannabis is illegal, federal law. State laws say it isn't. The federal law also says that if there's any demonstrable proof and use that medical cannabis is viable in the United States, that the federal law will reflect that use and it won't be prohibited anymore. So we've had years and years of people using cannabis. Studies have proved it's wonderful medicine. States have changed laws, cities, et cetera, and the federal government just ignores its own rules and says it's no good. So with that as an overdrop, you've got a state like I live in Florida. We're having a little bit of a problem here, but in Florida, vets can use cannabis, go into the VA hospital, be treated, except for a case we're going to discuss later. That's fine. But what if the vet doesn't live in Florida? What if they live in a state that does not have a medical cannabis law? Well, they can't use cannabis and go to the VA and get treated. They use cannabis, illegally, of course, in their state and federally, and they will because it's good medicine. But if they go to the VA in their state that doesn't allow it and say, I'm using cannabis, but I still have a problem and I need your help, they won't help him or her. Medical treatment by geography, based on the use of a plant, an herb, so declared in 2014 by the American Herbal Association. Because they use an herb, they will get treated in the VA. Medical treatment by geography, medical treatment by zip code. I don't know, you want to support veterans? I think you all do. This is one way you can really support us. You can let the federal government know that this treatment of veterans is illogical, is certainly unequal, and it's medically irresponsible, if not just unethical. I don't know how you're a doctor in the VA and some guy comes in and says, I use cannabis and it keeps me from blowing my head off, and they send him home. To me, that's reprehensible, but it happens all the time. So that's one of the things that I wanted to talk about. And I've said enough now, Michael. Why don't you join in and tell these guys something about how VMCA started up, maybe?
Thanks, Alan. Happy Sunday to everybody. Great to be able to sit here and have a little brunch. I'm eating my grapes here, and a little light rain here, and I guess pouring down rain down by you, Al. But we're both in the outer rings of some of these storms that are hitting our east coast of the United States here. First of all, I'll totally agree with you actually on this notion of list. This is a strange phenomenon actually, for states to pass laws that have an actual list of qualifying conditions that a doctor can give you a medicine for. Is really, it's something we've accepted as a movement, I think, because in the heat of battle, you're trying to get things done, and it was a seemingly, sort of innocuous enough accommodation. But if you think about it, it really is an abomination. Doctors, just look at regular medications that you get from the pharmacy. They are approved by the FDA for whatever they're approved for. They have gotten some science that they were able to show the FDA that it was able to do this or this to help with that or that symptom, or this medication might even have a curative effect. And those things are approved by the FDA, but a doctor can prescribe that medication for whatever a doctor sees fit. It's called off-label prescribing. And while the medical company that makes that drug can't talk about off-label stuff, everybody else can that has free speech. And doctors recommend and prescribe medications all the time that are, being used in ways that were really never conceived of by the original manufacturers, frankly, and using them effectively. The only guidance there, and the only proviso being that the doctor can defend that use with some kind of science. They have a logical medical reason to think that this medicine might help, for their condition that they're trying to treat. So that's it. That's the only bar. So for us to have to say, oh, well, pain isn't qualified under the state law, only post-traumatic stress is, or only pain is and not post-traumatic stress or whatever, was just unacceptable to us. Actually, that has driven a lot of our work, because when we first got the VA policy back in 2010, And it said that the VA was certainly a safe place for veterans to, come in and get treated, even if they're using marijuana under a state program. And that's essentially what the VA policy said. It also said that they couldn't do anything. They couldn't handle the cannabis. They couldn't recommend it. They really washed their hands of it. So that meant we had to go out in the states and look at the state laws and make sure that they were fit to, help veterans as effectively as possible. It was an internal work of about a year with Al Byrne here and Johnny Evans. I think I would call a key contributor to that effort as well, where Veterans for Medical Cannabis Access decided, based on the evidence and based on the need, that post-traumatic stress would be our frontline issue. Many of the states already had chronic pain or pain written into their laws. Most states had traumatic brain injury. Most states had cancer. So post-traumatic stress was really an outlier. That was something that wasn't really in these laws. The only law when we started was New Mexico that had post-traumatic stress specifically written in as a qualifying condition. And of course, our favorite law, Prop 215, California, did not have a list. So post-traumatic stress was being treated there already. And that was in fact where we learned a lot of what we learned initially from Dr. Mikaria and others in California who were experimenting with cannabis under Prop 215 without the restraints of government. But it was Brian Crum in New Mexico that championed post-traumatic stress in New Mexico and started the ball rolling, established the first documentation, and really gave us something to work with. And the documentation and the, almost unbelievable amount of documentation, scientific evidence that you all were able to provide to me, gave me the ability to go into the states and work in the states. Working with veterans in the various states, we went from just that one state with that qualifying condition to about 7 years later having 27, I think it was, when we quit. And it's more than that now. It's, I think, 30 or 31 states out of the 31 or 32 states, I don't keep up with the numbers, that actually have post-traumatic stress as a qualifying. In other words, just about every modern medical marijuana law has post-traumatic stress as a qualifying condition now as a result of our work. And it was very quiet work. We worked with veterans in the particular states, with doctors, medical professionals in those particular states. The only thing that we moved from state to state was our knowledge base and our experience. And in each state, we were able to, rather easily accomplish this and then move on without looking back. In other words, we never gloated or, did any kind of press releases about our success. We just allowed it to organically spread on purpose because we wanted the medical professionals and the veterans and other patients to find this modality of treatment without any hype. We wanted them to find it through their course of treatment as a logical step. And that kept, I think a lot of problems away. We've had almost no problems. I mean, I'm almost a little bit weirded out by the lack of problems that we've had because I feel like I must be missing something. But we've got tens of thousands of patients, including many thousand veterans in the many states that are using cannabis for post-traumatic stress. Without much incident, without any real negative consequences, without any clinics or any medical professionals coming back and saying, oh, well, the benefits didn't seem to outweigh the risks in this treatment, which is something that I think the naysayers against cannabis fully expected all along. And we not only didn't get that from everybody, we didn't get that from anybody. But anyway, I think it's important to clarify a couple of things. One is, while we don't get paid, we don't get a paycheck, we don't get any honorariums, generally speaking, we don't get any, kind of income from any of this work. We have, and we do have fiscal sponsors that have helped us not pay expenses. So when you hear about me flying off to Geneva, I'm not paying for that out of my pension, I assure you. But when I get there and I go to the flea market, that comes out of my pension. I think there was one other thing I wanted to clarify as well. Oh yeah, so the treatment by geography. Treatment by geography is almost exactly like you described it, but there's a couple of nuances that I would correct. One is that the federal government doesn't know anything about state law. They know federal law, and that was the interesting thing. The very first version, the version you were trying to find of the VA policy back in 2010, talked a lot about medical marijuana. But think about what a problem that would be, to have an agency of the federal government talking about medical marijuana as if it's real, as if it's accepted in medical standards, when that is a clear contradiction with US federal law, which clearly states that marijuana has no medical value. I mean, I'm not just paraphrasing it, it's actually written into the federal law of the United States that marijuana has no medical value. So having the VA sort of accept the medical value of cannabis in a directive, I think was almost immediately a problem. That's why you noticed it was passed in 2010 and updated in 2011. Somebody somewhere read that, figured that out, and corrected that, and pulled all the medical marijuana language out of that. But you know, it's a double-edged sword. What hurts us helps us, right? I'd rather that they talked about medical use. I'd rather the whole thing be about medicine. But it is really true. The federal government doesn't know anything about state law. State programs, whether they're for regulated adult access or for medicine, have to be recognized by the federal government in this regard. So if you're a veteran and you're using cannabis under a state program of any kind, you showed ID and you bought it at a store, or you went and you got a doctor's recommendation and got a certificate and got it from the store that way, or however you got it, they have to recognize that. They really don't have any way to delineate that. So that's why the VA policy today doesn't make any mention of medical use, is because they aren't, as a federal entity, in a position to talk about medical use of cannabis. And that's been one of the biggest problems for us all along with the federal government. But a veteran can go into any hospital in any part of the country and be treated and use their cannabis and follow basic steps where they protect themselves as far as, you know, how they present themselves and, you know, basically what not to do more than what to do. You know, not get in a fight with your doctor, not, you know, try to teach everybody in the staff about medical marijuana, not talk about illegal use of marijuana or how you buy it. But anyway, they don't know state law. They have no idea of state law, and in your facility, I would challenge them if they start talking about state law. They're a federal government, federal entity. They have no connection to the state law, no knowledge of state policy, formally or informally. So if they start talking about, oh, it's illegal in the state, look at them with a blank stare and say, I thought you were with the federal government. So anyway, if you get arrested in that state, that's where what you just said applies. So what you said actually perfectly applies, but only to a special case. And that is where you're using cannabis in a state where it's not legal and you get arrested, and you may be denied access to a lot of things when you're in prison. So got to think about that. And that's a reality. We have a lot of veterans in prison, and I'll hand it back to you, Al.
Yeah, well, let me just get on top of this again. This list thing, this cannabis thing. There's about 550,000 drugs available to me and you in the United States. Some of them are prescription, a lot of them are over the counter. 550,000, and they're all in a system. It's all in a system. And that system, as Mike explained, doctors can take Schedule 3, 4, 5 and do what they want with them. All of that's a system, and it works. The pharmacies, think about the drugs. So we got 550,000 drugs in a program that works. And then we have cannabis. It's not even a drug, it's a plant. And it's got its own world. It's got its own world in medicine, in law enforcement, in the courts, in the jails, in the money. It's like its own world. And I've never understood that. I've never understood why the cannabis plant isn't treated like the flax plant or even the opium poppy. I mean, the opium poppy doesn't have a separate whole world built around it. Yeah, they make heroin out of it, but it's a lot of you people in Europe, by the way, use heroin as a very good pain medicine under doctor's control. But anyway, it's a plant, and it's got a whole system on it. And then within this system, you've got lawyers, basically lawyers. There's a few doctors, I suppose, and Indian chiefs that are in these senates and congresses. But basically, they sit there with a bunch of lawyers who are now taking a plant that has its own world and deciding what that plant can be used for medically. like they went to medical school or they're pharmacists or something, which they're not. They have no clue. The only thing I know about them is that they're not doctors, and there's a law that says if you're not a doctor, you can't practice medicine. You go to jail. Well, they do it all the time. What's the list for? And Mike said this earlier. You know, these docs and nurses and people, they go to college, and then they go to medical school, and then they do a residency working for other people who are mentoring them, even in the hospital settings or whatever. And then they finally can be a doctor, a real honest to God practicing physician, which is great. But it took them years. And so these people in all these years, all this education, all this dedication, they can handle 550,000 drugs. They can decide all this stuff, all of it, but they can't decide the use of a plant. Isn't that absurd? And then the people who decide how to use the plant medically aren't medically professionals. Isn't that absurd? So I would say my big objection, I'm word for word with Mike. I agree with everything he said, but my big objection is that this cannabis plant is in its own world anyway. Why don't we just put it with everything else like everything else is? And we certainly ought to leave the medical decisions to medical professionals. Now, those professionals, they take on these 550,000 drugs with three things in their back pocket: their experience, their education, of course, and most of all, their judgment. So my point again is you've got medical professionals make medical decisions for patients, except with a cannabis plant where lawyers and law enforcement makes decisions. It's totally absurd. And that leads to the list. Why is there a list? Massachusetts state law, which I had something to do with, is pretty simple. It sort of boils down almost to a single sentence, which basically says cannabis use by patients in Massachusetts the use of it shall be decided by the patient and the physician, just like the patient and the physician decide every other thing. And all of a sudden, cannabis in Massachusetts is just basically like every other potential medicine that a doctor may look at. So, you know, that makes sense. The Brian Crum, the wonderful Army vet from New Mexico, he's a nurse practitioner, wrote the New Mexico law. And it's the same kind of an approach Brian took. It's like, this is a decision, the medical decision, you let medical professionals make it. So I'm glad that VMCA had a lot to do with getting guys and girls to go into these state houses and get post-traumatic stress put on this list, on a list that I think is absurd, in a system I think is absurd.
Oh, I'm right there with you on that, Al. We are in the middle of a lot of different things. So first of all, I want to commend you on being way out ahead again with your thoughts, because one of the main things on our big cannabis agenda, not just our work with medicinal cannabis that we conduct as Veterans for Medical Cannabis Access, but the larger cannabis movement per se, is going to deal with, and I think in short order, is the reunification of cannabis as an agricultural crop, full stop. That we no longer can tolerate and deal with cannabis being a drug plant and, you know, under those special rules that you described. And then on the other hand, it's hemp, where it's an agricultural crop and it's legal. And that's created some really strange conundrums. You know, you've got what I call the 55-gallon drum problem. I know you know what I'm talking about, Al, but if you've got legal hemp and the delineation between hemp and cannabis is just the amount of THC, so you're allowed to have a very tiny amount of THC, I think it's 0.03% out in the field. Well, 0.03% is certainly too low of an amount to get any, you know, effect from smoking the buds and really enjoying it like cannabis. But when you start extracting out the cannabinoids from a field of cannabis that's below that threshold, you get 55-gallon drums of THC, just the same kind of 55-gallon drums of THC that you get from the plants down the road being grown as drug crops under a medicinal marijuana program with the turrets and the guards and the fences and the safes and the etc. And you know, this is a ridiculous thing that we've created for cannabis. Like you said, this brick by brick, other alternative dimension, or other alternative universe that we've built for cannabis needs to be deconstructed, and cannabis being put back in the fold. And for people's edification, from a historian, we're going back to where we once were. About 100 years or so ago, about 1920, there was a U.S. Department of Agricultural pamphlet on agricultural crops used as medicine. And cannabis was in that little pamphlet, along with other plants that are grown in the United States and typically used for medicine. It's not unusual to grow an agricultural crop and have, as one of the many products of that crop, a medicine. Medicines are regulated differently than hemp products, but they all come from cannabis. And we need to start talking about cannabis as cannabis. So I wanted to take an opportunity today and talk a little bit about you know, the patient advocacy that went into the behind the scenes work that led to the VA policy that has sort of driven the engine of Veterans for Medical Cannabis Access has been actually the patient advocacy. I've been the main patient advocate working with the system, using the system itself to help veterans. And that's what led to the VA policy itself, you know, when we created it. And just to be clear, and just sort of correct my own, you know, presentation from just a little while ago, the VA policy is set up where you're supposed to get your certification from the state that you're using cannabis legally as a medicine, and take that medical certification and bring it in to the VA and have that be part of your medical file. There's actually a constructive part of your medical file created by VA policy to accept that information, just, you know, metadata wise, a little checkbox on your file that would then help the VA understand how many veterans are using cannabis and for what conditions and stuff like that. It wouldn't be, not to my knowledge or to my mental ability, I can't really see much of a downside to that checkbox. It wasn't something that we fought against. It was more along the lines of something we would have asked for, but we didn't have to. That's what they created themselves within the system. And this is something that Al and I have been slowly ratcheting up the pressure on getting that documentation from the VA. Although I gotta say, I'm not really expecting a lot. The VA has not adhered to this. The VA doctors don't know anything about it. The VA hasn't really promoted its own policy. It's just one of a stack of literally hundreds of directives, and the veteran affair doctors that I work with out in the field that are mistakenly denying access to medications like pain treatment because the veteran is, quote, tested positive or failed a marijuana drug test, or quote, violated their pain contract or pain agreement. This is all language that tells me the doctor doesn't understand VA policy, is not compliant with VA policy, and is acting in a way that is not, you know, generally in compliance with VA policy. They're out on their own and they don't even know it. They think they're doing the right thing, but they don't even know it. And the reason is generally because the VA has not taken up the responsibility. I mean, I wouldn't have said this years ago, but gosh, 2010, we're in 2021, 10, 11 years, the VA should have been able to educate its troops out in the field, and those VISNs, as they're called, the Veterans Integrated Service Networks, which each have 10 or so VA hospitals in them, should have been given a huge amount of guidance, should have been pulling experts from the field that we would know, PhDs and medical experts that are working on cannabinoid and cannabis, pharmaceutical and clinical-based practice science, you know, Dr. Andy Weil, others that would be, I'm sure, happy to go in and talk to the VA. But no, they've never really tried to educate their doctors. So that, together with the fact that if you're just using cannabis legally, as I said before, under a state program and it's not a medical program, then what are you going to show the VA? Your receipt? That's kind of a cryptic. I've gotten receipts from dispensaries before, and I don't think it would be really suitable as documentation for the VA system. So no, they're on their own now. They screwed themselves. The VA, part of the federal government, by saying marijuana is not a medicine, has yet again blinded them from how the veterans are using it, because now it really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. Like I said, it should work the way we would hope, you know, with the cards and the documentation and the veterans being supported by the VA and the cannabis being part of a treatment plan. It's an active treatment plan with cooperation with the medical, you know, sources outside and inside the VA. Yeah, that's a perfect world that we would love and we aim for. But the world we got is one where the VA has no clue where you got your cannabis from. Even if you told them, the documentation that you'd be showing them means nothing to them because they know nothing of state law. So just, you know, wing it. That's the advice for the day.
I don't have any personal problems with the VA. You know, there's no people there that I'm mad at or any, but I'd like to say this about what you just covered. Since July of 2010, I've got 11 years now. This is August. So over 11 years, there have been literally, I don't think there's at least 1 million, maybe 2 million veterans have gone into VA hospitals around the country, territories, Guam, wherever they are, and said, I use cannabis, and they got treated. Now, again, the geography problem still exists, but millions have gone in and been treated, okay? 11 years. What happened? If I look as a businessman, a guy's own businesses, had people working for him, I would look at if I was a VA 11 years ago and I was the boss, I'd say, boy, this is a hell of an opportunity. We're going to find out from all kinds of people, all kinds of ages, men and women, how they use cannabis, how much they use, how good it is or how bad it is. And we get it for free. We do this study for free. We just keep the data points, and we take those data points and we call them statistics, and we look and we say, wow, look at this, look at that. 11 years, what happened? The only thing I know, I just keep saying things like this to anybody that will listen. If you're a senator out there or you're a representative in a state, write them a letter. Hey, what happened? They're your vets. What happened? And where's the data? And if you don't have the data, why not? And if you don't have the data, you're fired. What were you doing there to begin with? You know, if you have the data, then give it to us. I'm sitting here for 11 years with Mike. BMCA is all over the place. No one's ever called us up, ever, from the VA or said to us in a conversation that any veteran using cannabis was a problem. Nobody, ever. Millions of people using cannabis, veterans. The VA has determined there is not anybody out there that created a problem with cannabis. Well, okay, I think that says something right there. Because I'm sure if somebody came running through the hallway with the crazy hearse paper, sensational guy with an axe just chopping everybody up down on the first floor, well, hey, that'd be it. We'd know it. We'd know it tomorrow. We'd know it before it was over, before the blood dried. But hey, nothing happens for 11 years. 1 million people use cannabis every day. Sick people getting better. Or they don't say anything, or they don't know. Either way, I have this problem with the VA. The management there, if you want to call that management, has either totally missed the boat on what could have been the biggest cannabis research project in the history of the world for free, or they have it and they aren't saying.
Wow. Holy shit. Drop the mic. Yeah, I agree completely. So, there's a couple of main patient advocacy cases that led into the VA policy. So I figured talking about one of those would probably be, a place to understand how patient advocacy plays a role. There's 2 cases that I'll highlight, one in California and one in Montana. And a veteran's work in Michigan, and then my work in DC. Those puzzle pieces came together to create the VA medical marijuana policy. And the first set of cases was in California. And this was interesting because we had this pattern of complaints from veterans that were being told they weren't going to be able to get their pain treatment until they, well, actually, I'm trying to rewind my brain to the beginning. So at the beginning, it was a new pain doctor that took over. And when the new pain doctor came in, he just basically cleaned house. And he said, if you're using medical marijuana, you're out. Just like that. And I immediately went into, like, you know, assessment mode, trying to figure out how to communicate with this person, this new pain management team leader at this big California VA hospital system. And found out quickly that he actually was a doctor on the CMCR, the California Medical Cannabis Research Group. And I was like baffled. This was a new one for me. I was like, wait a minute. Usually the doctors that act this way are acting out of ignorance. This is a guy that's part of the Cannabis Research Group of San Diego, world-renowned cannabis research that did double-blind placebo-based studies on cannabis, found positive results on cannabis at VA hospitals since this time and before that time. Had worked already very successfully on cannabis. He should know better. So then I was, oh, what do I do? You know, do I just communicate directly with him? But, you know, that's not going to work. If he's doing this, he's not going to change based on what I say. Maybe I'll go to the team leader of the CMCR. So I reached out to the team leader of the CMCR and talked to him. And at first he was going to speak to the doctor. And then he said, you know, he thought about it for a while. He said, maybe it would be more appropriate if I speak directly to his boss, you know, in that VA center rather than him, because it's just inappropriate. He may be my subordinate in my project, but he's, you know, he's their employee, not mine. And I thought that was very smart, a good idea. So he went, and then he thought about it for a while, and he said, you know, maybe it would be better if I just communicate with the regional, you know, VA rather than just this one VA. If this is a problem at this one VA. And then finally, he thought about it again, and I did some research and connected him, this leader of the CMCR in California, with the team leader of the pain management system of the VA in Washington, D.C. And I suppose during this time, I can't remember exactly how it unfolded, but he did talk to his fellow doctor, and he did soften his position a little bit, although not much. This doctor at this VA in California told all the patients, okay, come on in and go through a drug abuse assessment. And if you successfully go through the basic drug assessment and basic drug treatment counseling very successfully, then I'll reinstate your prescriptions for your pain medicine. And as I understand, several of the vets did. They complied with that and had no substance abuse issues. They were basically cleared from substance abuse problems by this rather rigorous, over the top, covering my ass, you know, way of doing it that this doctor came up with. But I'll leave it at that for the moment with this, with the doctor that connected with the other doctor up in Washington, D.C. And then I'll go to this other case out in Montana. So this is a case where veterans were being denied access by a particular person within the administration. Usually there's two different kinds of problems that I deal with. One is where the doctor is making an error on their own, and they're just, you know, acting out of what they believe is true, which they think they're following the law. Often they usually talk to me about following the law and being a good citizen. I mean, you know, I'm talking to these doctors. I know what they're thinking. They're not saying anything medical. If they were to say something medical, then it would be out of my purview. But what they're saying are all rules and regs and law and stuff, and that's in my purview. So I correct them. And just to be clear, you know, a doctor hasn't, to my knowledge, I don't even have any significant friction within the VA based on cause. In other words, I've never run into any doctors that said you shouldn't use medical marijuana because I have this valid medical reason that I'm about to state, and I stated. No, that doesn't happen, hasn't happened. And now it's probably laughing on the inside because he knows with the mountain of evidence and information that we're sitting on, having done hundreds of classes on CMEs for physicians, learning about cannabinoid medicine and pharmacy and best clinical treatment practice, that there isn't this huge downside with cannabis. It doesn't really exist. So, but anyway, we had this administrator in Montana, a director, who just wrote it right out. You can't use cannabis in my facility, basically. I can't believe she put it in writing. Holy cow. It was like, I almost felt bad for her, you know, it's like, you know, it's like giving me a softball to hit, man. Whoa. So I came down kind of hard on her, really, because it was so clear. And that case, all right, so this is what happened. It's amazing how the world works. So now I'll give you the rest of the puzzle and show you how these pieces fit in, right? So I was trying to figure out what to do with this letter that I got. So I got this letter from the Undersecretary of Health of the VA that said marijuana should be treated like any other medicine. The reason why I got that letter from the Undersecretary of the VA was because the General Counsel of the VA referred the question over to him. But right at that same time that I'm talking to the Undersecretary of Health of the VA, these guys just connected. The CMCR of California, the mountain of research and independent clinical knowledge and academic strength from San Diego University of California, backed directives and policy positions of the pain management system of the VA. They just locked in. And here I am talking to the Undersecretary of Health. When all this came together, I got this letter from the Undersecretary of Health, and I didn't know what to do with it. You know, I mean, I remember actually standing there. I don't know if I remember telling you this, Al, but I was standing there at the driveway with this letter in my hand, thinking, like, what am I going to do with this? Like, if I tell anybody about this, they'll just think I printed it myself. It's just a piece of paper, you know, with printing on it after all. Easy enough to forge something like that. You know, the VA could disclaim it after I said something about it, which would make me really look foolish. Wow, what do I do with it? And I really actually thought to myself right at that moment, wouldn't it be great if like a newspaper of record, like the New York Times, did something with it? You know, that way it would be fact checked and they would have talked to the VA, and when it was printed, you know, everybody would know it was real. And I don't even remember how it happened, but I was talking with a good friend, Steve Fox, down in Colorado. We were working on adding cannabis for post-traumatic stress, a qualification in Colorado law for many years. And I was talking to him, and he was actually working with this reporter from the New York Times who had aspirations of getting a front page cover article on the New York Times about cannabis. And he had tried to write an article about Colorado's fight to add post-traumatic stress and New Mexico's edition and how great it was and stuff. But the front page cover editor said that wasn't USA enough. That was just New Mexico, Colorado. You know, it sort of vicariously affected vets, but it wasn't national enough. And I told Steve, I thought this was definitely national enough. And Steve sent me over to the reporter, and I told the reporter the same thing. I think this is pretty national of a story. He presented it to the New York Times front page cover editors, and they decided to run with the story. And the story was going to be about this letter that we got from the Undersecretary of Health. But with the pressure of the New York Times front page coming down on the VA capitulated. And I remember I got this really cool call from the New York Times cover editors saying the VA is asking if it would be okay to hold the article for a few days and make the article about a new VA policy on marijuana instead of about your letter that you got. Would that be okay with you? And I remember laughing, you know, because that was the greatest outcome I could ever have imagined. I was like, fuck yeah. And that policy that they wrote, I'm quite sure came out of that cauldron of working with the CMCR, pain management, and the Undersecretary of Health. It was just all this is, you know, just think about everything I just said. Everything is dancing on a wire. How any of this happened is so completely by chance and couldn't have been done any other way, to my imagination. But here we are, we got this policy, and it was written essentially about medical cannabis. It recognized cannabis as a medicine, and what a conundrum it was for a little while. It was front page cover above the fold on the New York Times. Everybody around the world read about this. That was 5 years of hard work done in a day. You know what I mean? Now, if we had worked as Veterans for Medical Cannabis Access to educate everybody about that policy and teach them about it, and, you know, make all the ground that article made, it would have been 5 years of hard work to the day.
Yeah, that was it was serendipity
Oh,
is what the whole thing was.
Well, pardon me, before I lose the thought, I wanted to finish that because I left something out. I realized the story of the Montana patient wound up being the central line, the central theme of the New York Times article. So if you look at that article, it's still archived on our website. You'll see the theme is about this very, very, very clear case of this director making a fool of herself, not following VA policy, or not. At that time, there was no VA policy. We hadn't created it. So what she wasn't following was basic sort of good administrative practices and following the general principles of ethics and good veterans treatment.
Well, listen, Mike, we got to think about wrapping up here. These people are probably bored to death by now listening to us ramble on. What we normally do. Yeah, you think?
I don't know, man.
We normally, folks, have an interview that we do.
It feels good for you and I just to sit and talk about some of this stuff, and it's on the record. I mean, I don't feel like typing any of this stuff out, so it's on the record. And YouTube, it'll be archived on YouTube, and anybody could find it. And this is one of our what I'm calling our baseline episodes. It's just me and Al talking. I enjoy the shit out of this, so I don't care about anybody else right at the moment. But yeah. This is really, I think, important information that people need to know. It needs to be available for the history books, and it'll be on YouTube after we take it off of the Facebook Live. Anybody that catches this on a Sunday morning, we're moving to this time, noon on Sunday, every other week. I think it's a better time. It's a little easier on the people on the West Coast. So I think that might be our new time. But in the future, we will have veterans. We're talking to a couple of veterans right now. Paul Stanford, we're hoping will join us on our next show. We're going to have sort of this eclectic mix and an open forum. It may get boring at times, it may not, but you're going to hear from somebody in an unscripted fashion without having to pull quotes out of them or speak in sound bites. You get to say what you want to say. You get to talk as much as you want to talk. And when you're done, we'll cut it off and we'll put it on YouTube. And we're not playing these games anymore. So, but anyway, man, Al, I love you. I love sitting with you on a Sunday and having some grapes. And I'm glad we were able to do it. Your connection has cleared up quite a bit. And I've commandeered the microphone long enough, but wanted to say, everybody, this has been the Veterans Voices with Al Byrne and Mike Krawitz, Veterans for Medical Cannabis Access, part of the Veterans Action Council, and you'll be hearing more about that. Much love to everybody out there, and I'll let you say whatever you want to say to take us out, Al.
Well, thanks, Mike. Again, yeah, it was nice to be able to put out some information. I hope it was valuable. We're open to having questions. We're open to suggestions about veterans that you'd like to have us interview on the show some Sunday. We're available easy. Just get us through the Facebook method. But we'd love to have you come back. We'd love to let you know that we're kind of been vetted, Mike and I. We say a lot of things off the top of our heads, but we've been saying those things for a long time, and we know it's right. So you've heard again, and I want you to hear again. You can use cannabis as a veteran, and you should. If you're on other things that are harder, you should at least have that option and see what happens. But you're not going to lose any benefits, ever, never, anywhere. As long as you stay legal, do everything that you should do, you're fine. You're going to be fine. But anyway, come on back in a couple of weeks. We'll have a vet with us, I'm sure, for an hour or so. And take care.